Welcome to Inside the She Cave, Trailblazers, Innovators, and Rule Breakers. I'm your host, Cindy Glanzrock. On today's episode, I am pleased to welcome Carolyn Maloney. I have admired former Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney since she was first elected in 1992 to Congress for New York, my hometown, and has an extensive list of accomplishments of special note, her charge for women and minorities. She spent her entire career working to advance women's rights as a leading advocate and champion for legislation to recognize the ratification of the ERA, Equal Rights Amendment. She believes women will never gain equality, including equal pay for equal work, without the ERA in place to protect our rights. It's simple. Women have come a long way, but not long enough.
I went to Congress and I've always made women's issues a primary responsibility because so few women were in Congress. Now we have over 100 women in Congress, but they rolled back and overturned Roe. And it's the only constitutional action that's been reversed. I didn't think they would do such an extreme thing, but they overturned 50 years of precedent. I thought it was an accepted right. And we are now working hard to pass legislation and protections for women. And the Equal Rights Amendment has never been more important to strengthen women and to strengthen their rights.
I had the privilege of hearing Carolyn speak at Hunter College's Roosevelt House, where she is currently serving as the Eleanor Roosevelt Distinguished Leader in Residence. She's a prime example of trailblazing women, an innovator and a rule breaker. Please enjoy my heart-to-heart conversation inside the She Cave with my friend Carolyn Maloney. Congresswoman, or I should say, Congresswoman, for me, you'll always be a Congresswoman. Carolyn Maloney, you're my friend and you're my representative for life. And you are someone who has been a trailblazer, an innovator, and most importantly, you haven't broken the rules, but you're creating new rules. Rules need to be recreated. And you were elected, if I recall, in Congress, it just seems like a few days ago, because you're still looking so young, 1992, during the Year of the Woman. And hopefully it's still the Year of the Woman. It's always the Year of the Woman. And even if there's going to be a few tears shed, because we're not exactly where we exactly want to be, but we're getting there. And they say, we've come a long way, baby, but we've got a long way to go. So from what I remember, you're nationally recognized. You're as you put it most best, as a progressive, pragmatic, practical, I would say, but also you just no holds bar. You just say what you believe is important. You're not the kind of woman that holds back about getting things done. And that's why I wanted you on this program today, because if anyone I can count on, it's you. There's so many wonderful things you've passed, which you're going to share with us today. Most importantly, whether it's national security, financial services, the economy, women's rights and issues, you've really touched on them all. But you have a long way still to go, because we're not quite there yet. As I recall from your book said it best. You'll show us the title to your book today, so we remember we still have a long way to go. You're ranked as the second most effective legislator, if I recall, in the 117th Congress in 2021 to 2023. You were the third most effective in the 116th Congress by a nonpartisan, may I say, Center for the Effective Law Making Representatives. I think I also remember that you were the first woman to serve as a chairwoman for the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, and that's the Joint Economic Committee, and the first woman to represent her own district, which is my district, in Congress. As a teacher, which I think is how you started your career, you told me, as a teacher, you realized when some funding was eliminated that the only way to get it done was to lobby for what you wanted and what you needed, and you did that. And you're going to share that with us today, too. When your program, as you explained to me, got defunded. As a leading advocate for all this legislation, recognizing the Equal Rights Amendment is probably the most important thing right now that you're doing. So I'd like you to start on that today. What's going on with the ERA? give us a little bit of background on what's happening right now, because it's ERA Now. I saw you with Chuck Schumer out there with your sign, ERA Now. And then we'll go a little bit back into your history and where you started your illustrious past and your children, and where we're going next. So let's start off with what's happening with the ERA, Carolyn. I don't understand.
Cindy,
can you explain it to us?
Cindy, when I went to Congress, I had 10 things I wanted to do. I wanted to build the Second Avenue subway. I did it. I wanted to protect consumers from unfair, deceptive credit card charges. I did it. I wanted to strengthen laws to protect women in rape instances. I did it. The one thing I was not able to do, although I put in legislation and worked on it the whole time, was the recognition of the Equal Rights Amendment as the 28th Amendment. Along the path, I created a women's museum, or passed the legislation creating a women's museum, a Smithsonian Women's Museum on the Mall. I was walking around trying to figure out how to get the votes in Congress, and I said, where are the women? The mall has everything except for half the population. So I'm now serving on that board, and I am serving at Roosevelt Hunter College as a leader in residence. And the project we're working on with the students is the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment and recognition of it. As you said, I was elected the Year of the Woman. It was exciting to see so many women walk down the aisle, not to get married, but to be sworn into the United States Congress. But women's issues have always been a high priority of mine. And now that I'm no longer in Congress, I want to continue working on the things that I worked on while I was in Congress that weren't done, which is the ratification and recognition of it, of the Equal Rights Amendment. As you know, in the 1970s, there are 3 requirements for an Equal Rights Amendment, or for an amendment. You have to get a 2/3 vote in the House, 2/3 vote in the Senate, and 38 states have to ratify it. And we've done all of that. It took a lot of years. It passed in the 70s, passed in the House, and it passed in the Senate. The senators added a time limit to it. And I am told by women that were there, they went to see Alice Paul, who happens to be a relative of my late husband. His grandmother was her first cousin. His grandmother was a traditional Quaker woman. Alice Paul, of course, was force-fed, demonstrated, was thrown into an insane asylum because she believed that women should have the right to vote. So she had a very hard fight, and she is credited with having achieved that. She introduced it, the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote, passed in roughly 2020. And in 2023, Alice Paul went to New York, to Seneca Falls, the home of the women's rights movement, and introduced the Equal Rights Amendment. She said, if we don't watch out, we'll be back here 50 years later and still not have it. Now it is 100 years this year, and we still don't have the Equal Rights Amendment. And we see our rights being eroded and attacked, with the attack on the overturn of Roe v. Wade, with the Dobbs decision, with a movement to restrict access to contraceptives, to restrict access to abortions, to restrict access to mifepristone, a medicated abortion. So you see women's rights rolling back. With an Equal Rights Amendment, then our rights would be in the Constitution and be protected. So where we stand now is that it passed in the 70s. Quickly, 35 states passed it. Then it stalled, and they got an extension. They didn't meet the extension, but then it stalled. And then Nevada ratified in 2017, Illinois in 2018, and Virginia in 2020. So we have met the 38 state threshold. I would say that it should be in the Constitution now.
Well, if I recall, you had 51 votes, including 2 Republican women, but you needed 9 more votes. You needed 60 votes. That's what I understood in April, and that's why it did not pass this past April 2023 on the floor.
Well, that's true. I'm now the co-chair of the Equal Rights Coalition, which is over 280 groups that are supporting the Equal Rights Amendment. and working full-time on it. We got the same bill in the House and the Senate, which would remove the deadline that was added. If Congress can add a deadline, Congress can remove it. And what was voted on and ratified was the amendment, not the time limit. So we're saying the time limit doesn't matter. It should be ratified now. Before I left Congress, I initiated a petition drive asking Leader Schumer to have a vote on it so that the American women and like-minded men could see where our elected officials stood. He was good to this promise. He promised he would have a vote on it. He came to a rally that I organized with Hunter students at Hunter College. He was one of the first people to sign the petition that we have out there for the Equal Rights Amendment. And he held the first hearing in 40 years and the first vote in 40 years. It was bipartisan. It had 53 votes. The Republicans invoked cloture, requiring 60 votes. So we have to get those 8 additional votes or have a carve out that women's rights are so important and equal rights are so important that you should not be able to invoke a cloture or a requirement of 60 votes.
Why is it 60 votes in this particular case? If you could just explain that, the cloture.
Well, there is something called the filibuster that requires 60 votes. It's a procedure that was adopted for the Senate rules that makes it harder to achieve votes in certain cases. And the leadership of the Republican Party invoked cloture or invoked the requirement of 60 votes. That's part of their procedures. And that's what we're facing right now. But we have the same bill in that House, and it has 203 co-sponsors. We need to get to 218. We now have a Republican House leadership. When we get to 218, we can start what we call a motion to discharge, which would move the bill to the floor for a vote.
I understand.
What about
what is the difference between the 28th and the 14th Amendment?
The 28th Amendment, well, the 14th Amendment was, as you know, passed for slavery. That's what it was passed for. And many people then were interpreting that bill to also have equal rights for women. In fact, the so-called Roe v. Wade was based on the 14th Amendment that everyone had the right to privacy. But in this recent decision by the Supreme Court, the so-called Dobbs decision, they're saying that there is no right to privacy. They're basically gutting the protections of the 14th Amendment. And they have gone so far to say not only are we going to roll back a woman's right to choose, we're going to also go after contraception, or access to contraception. We're also going to go after mifepristone and limiting that. Since the Dobbs decision has come down, 14 states have banned abortions, basically, by having a 6-week window only. But in 6 weeks, a woman doesn't even know if she's pregnant, quite frankly. I didn't know I was pregnant when I was 6 weeks pregnant. And then several others are putting other restrictions there. So and to put it in retrospect, I announced for Congress on the day of the so-called Planned Parenthood versus Casey decision, which came out and rolled back and chipped away at some of the protections of Roe v. Wade. And I was there with Bella Abzug and Geraldine Ferraro and all the leaders down at City Hall. They were all bemoaning the action. And I announced for Congress. So I announced for Congress and ran for Congress. I defeated a 14-year incumbent who outspent me 4-1, a Republican. And I always made women.
Who was that you beat?
It was Bill Green.
Right.
And I went to Congress, and I've always made women's issues a primary responsibility because so few women were in Congress. Now we have over 100 women in Congress, but they rolled back and overturned Roe. And it's the only constitutional action that's been reversed. I didn't think they would do such an extreme thing, but they overturned 50 years of precedent. I thought it was an accepted right. And we are now working hard to pass legislation and protections for women. And the Equal Rights Amendment has never been more important to strengthen women and to strengthen their rights.
Well, it's interesting, Carolyn, because we're 49.7, so almost 50% as of the U.S. Census Bureau of women in terms of the percentage of women's population in our country, right? However, women make up about a quarter of all members of the 118th Congress, which is the highest percentage from what I understand in U.S. history, which is a considerable increase from where things were. And in New York, women make up almost 31% of the state legislature, which is up from 28% in 2018. So women are 19 out of 63 senators in the New York Senate. That's 30%. 48 out of the 150 in the New York State Assembly, which is 32%. So women make up about 24% of the New York City Council, about 12 out of 51. How do we get more women on our sides that want to represent us, in Congress and City Council? How do we get more women to step up? And how do we get the women that don't believe in the ERA to come around? Because I think that's an obstacle that we have. Don't you agree?
Well, the polling shows that 80 to 85% of Americans support the Equal Rights Amendment when polled on it. When we polled in the 1970s, it was roughly 60%. It's roughly 85% of Democrats and 60% of Republicans. So the support for the Equal Rights Amendment has never been stronger. And I think that that's a very, very good sign. So part of that is that we have elected more women. When I began my career, I was the only woman in the room, and rights for women were not thought about, and the protections were not there. I recall when my second child, I became pregnant with it was my first child. I went to personnel and I said, "What are your leave policies?" And they said, "We don't have any. You just leave." I said, "I don't want to leave." It's a true story. They said, "Well, you'll be the first one." They expected everyone to leave if they had children. I had to fight to hold on to my job. I hired someone to come in and do my job while I was out, because I knew they would erase my job if I had ever left. Now we have paid family leave. I even passed the legislation to expand unpaid family leave, so you're not going to be fired for having a child, to all of the federal employees. I wanted it for everyone, for every working woman and man, and we have many like-minded men who are our allies in all of this. But we not only need to elect more women, we need to elect more like-minded men who support us and support our equality and support our rights and the freedom to make decisions about our own health care. And there are many, many men who are there who are our allies, and we are so grateful for their support too.
Well, I see you have a book behind you, Equal Means Equal. You said a friend of yours wrote that, but that's very relevant. Equal means equal, right?
Right, exactly. Let's put it in the Constitution.
And you also have Lady Liberty behind you, but I think you said she's shedding some tears. Why is she crying?
This was an award that was given to me by the Maxed Out Women's organization in New York that support women candidates, and it's Lady Liberty, and her crown is Roe v. Wade, and then she's crying because it's been repealed. So that's the symbolism of it. But I think that what we need to do is we need to show in the reality that 85% of Americans support the Equal Rights Amendment. And that's the reason for the petition drive that I've started with the students at Hunter College, that we're expanding to other colleges. And here is the quick response, the QR code right here. I'm going to hold it up if anybody wants to see it, for the Equal Rights Amendment. It'll take you to the petition. It'll take you to the website, or you can go to sign the number 4 ERA.org, and it'll take you to a website that we have where you can sign the petition and send it out to your friends and try to get the groundswell of support to show that the people of America really support equal rights for women.
Well, it was an extraordinary day on June 6th when you received your doctorate from President Raab at Hunter College, and that's when you explained that you have these students, a student-led petition, which I thought was remarkable at Hunter College, which of course has the Roosevelt House of Public Policy there. And I would say Eleanor is probably one of the people, if I was going to have my wish to have someone sitting at my dinner party besides you, Carolyn, it would be Eleanor. Eleanor, maybe we'd even let her bring her dog with her. But
right, Eleanor the Great.
Eleanor the Great. So I know Nancy Pelosi, the same day as you, all of you on stage with President Raab, she received the wonderful distinguished award, Eleanor Roosevelt Humanitarian Award, and you received your doctorate from Hunter. And you had several students up there supporting you that are part of this petition. So how many signatures do you have already? Do you have any idea?
We have 25,000.
Congratulations.
And we have a database that breaks down where they come from. Most of them come from New York, then California, but every single state has signed the petition and has signatories from it. So it has been a nationwide effort, and we're going to keep growing it and working on it.
What would you say is one of the things that you try to do besides this, that if you were still in Congress besides this, you would be working on? Not that it was a failure. It wasn't a failure. It was just something that you didn't have time to get to. I know this is very front and center, but is there anything else? I thought it was very interesting when you did the credit card, you passed that law. And I was wondering why you had done that. But was there anything, if you could explain what you did pass and also what maybe you tried to pass that didn't work out?
Well, I with the credit card Bill of Rights, we really struck down unfair, deceptive practices of the credit card industry. The Consumer Financial Control Board has said that my bill alone saves you, the consumer, over $16 billion, as in B, a year. So that's a lot of money that's in your pockets instead of going with unfair fees. And yes, I have other bills in that save consumers from unfair practices with overdraft fees and other fees. So I would have continued working on that. But also, I was a big believer in infrastructure. I brought over $10 billion to my district alone. The Second Avenue subway, which was I championed. It was the only subway, not in New York City, not New York State, but in the entire country that was built while I was in office, a significant one. And we're continuing to build it. We built the first phase that begins on 96th Street and connects down to the tip of Manhattan. We're working to move it up to 125th Street. But I brought in like $10 billion, and that was the L train modernization between Brooklyn and Manhattan, the connection under Roosevelt Island going to Queens. That's called the Queens Connector, the so-called East Side Connector that goes into Grand Central and is part of a modernization of Grand Central and brings the overcrowded LIRR into Manhattan. These were all projects that I worked on. But
now
one that I was not
Carolyn, we have to get people back on the subways also. The safety and security in our city.
Well, we have more police officers on the subway. You'll notice that. But I'm also working on high-speed rail between New York and Boston. I think nothing would grow our economy more. It's very important, and I feel that should be a priority of our leaders. Oftentimes, leaders don't take the long haul positions, but I worked on health care for the 9/11 workers. I worked 18 years until I made it a mandatory requirement to provide their health care and support. So I take on hard issues that take many years, and I think that nothing would grow the economy more for Boston and New York than to have high-speed rail between those two really important business districts.
Well, were you involved with any of the airports' decisions to give money to these airports, since we've put a lot
absolutely. Absolutely. I was there when President Biden, then Vice President, said we were a third world country because our airport at LaGuardia was just a mess. At which point all of us that were at the meeting that were elected officials said, well, help us fix it. And he did. He helped send federal dollars that helped us modernize LaGuardia Airport. And it's really beautiful now. It's an incredible advancement. So I love infrastructure. It's an investment in the future. It's an investment in the quality of life. And it also provides good paying jobs.
So what made you want to get into politics? Most people are running from it. I mean, it doesn't seem like many people want to run for president. We have Biden obviously running again, but I don't know if he has any competition. We have Donald Trump running again. I don't know if he has any competition. So we don't seem to be getting, a lot of people wanting to run for office. But you did back in what year was it that you decided?
1992, 30 years I was in Congress, a long time.
And what was your first career out of college?
I was a teacher, and I remember how you feel like you want to change the world. I thought I was going to change the world and go to East Harlem and help everybody get off of poverty and into good paying jobs. And I worked for a program called the Welfare Education Plan, and the program's funding was cut. And a number of us were elected. My first election, I was elected from the East Harlem district to represent the program at 110 Livingston Street, the leadership of the Board of Ed. And we decided we would go to Albany and get the funding back. It was a third funding from the city, which was coming in, a third from the federal government, but we needed the third from the state. And I was a very successful lobbyist. I got the money back. They doubled my salary. They promoted me. But through that experience of working in government, you could see the power of government. You could see that a legislator who really cared about education had more power than the chancellor of the city of New York, the head of the whole Board of Education, in terms of setting funding and priorities and standards for education. So I wanted to go back into government and be part of government. And I did go to Albany again and ended up working for two speakers and the Democratic leader of the state Senate before I ran for the city council.
Well, it's sort of an innovative way. You almost becoming a lobbyist is almost being like a businesswoman because you're getting money, right? You're sort of in development in a way because you have to get funding. And in a way, in office, you're doing the same thing as a politician. You're getting funding. So you're acting almost as a businesswoman, not just a politician. You're having to be very clever and smart and innovative, and you're going to have to cross aisles. So do you feel that back 30 years ago, there was more crossing the aisles and people wanting to work with one another than there has been recently?
I would say it has become very divisive now. It's the most divisive that I've seen.
And why is that?
It used to be that you would come out with a proposal, for example, Social Security or health care, and the Republicans would have their proposal, the Democrats would have theirs, and then we would, in a public debate it, and you would usually take the best aspects from the Democrats and from the Republicans, have a compromise and go forward. But somewhere along the line, they got to the point where they don't compromise. They start out in their positions and they stick there and they just fight each other. But I think Biden has been successful in gaining and meriting the support of the Republican Party with the infrastructure bill that was needed very, very much, and with the whole investment into the environment, which we all need to save our planet, and other things that he's done and continues to do. I think the American Competes bill that helps modernize our industries and to compete and win in the world economy, and the efforts to bring manufacturing and jobs back to America. I think through COVID, we saw we couldn't depend on other countries to make the supplies that we needed. We don't want to ever have to see our hospital workers or doctors going to work in garbage bags because we couldn't get the required personal equipment that they needed.
Right.
We finally started manufacturing it in America again in order to get what we needed for our people. But that it was a wake-up call that we've got to bring these jobs back and depend on ourselves. We can't depend on other people or other countries because they're not there for us when we most need them.
Schumer, I think, has been a great advocate for New York, not to go off subject, but it's wonderful that you had such a good relationship, it seems, the two of you, as you did with Nancy. It seems like Pelosi, as you seem to have with a lot of your colleagues. I was disappointed what happened when they redistricted, and I wanted to understand, why did they do that?
Well, every 10 years, because of the census, you have to redraw the lines.
Okay.
So they redrew the lines, and the Democrats put in their proposal. The Republicans put in theirs. They couldn't agree. And the legislature moved forward with a plan that the Republicans thought was unfair, so they sued. They sued and they won in an upstate court. Cuomo then appointed someone as the chief judge who was a Republican who then became a Democrat. And she appointed a Republican map drawer that came in and drew maps that were very unfavorable to Democrats. No one in the right mind put two chairmen in together. Chairmen are notoriously or victoriously known for bringing money back to their districts or to their city, to their state, because of their positions. I was the first woman to chair the Joint Economic Committee and the first to chair the Government Reform and Oversight Committee. So it was a loss for the city and the state to lose a chairman.
Yes.
And they put two chairmen in the same committee, in the same district. Anyway, it was more west side than east side. I represented the east side.
Right. So there was more power on the west side, and that's why you're saying Jerry ended up with more votes as a result of that, because he was more represented. He had more people that was represented in his district, sort of, without saying so. Well, we're happy to have you now focused on something so important to us, especially when you see, I was reading different women. It's very interesting. I was reading about, and I'm sure you know her, another Cindy Hyde-Smith, who voted against, a Democratic sponsored, of course, resolution to declare the ERA amendment ratified as part of the U.S. Constitution. And I thought, what she was thinking is, I assume, and I don't want to assume, I don't know if she's pro-life or pro-choice or she's not. I don't know if that has anything to do with it. But also people said, well, that means that women have to be equal in terms of going into the military. So if men are asked, then women have to be asked. So it's equal in everything. I mean, even when it comes to if we go to war, that women will have to serve just like men. Is that true? Do you think that's one of the hesitations?
Well, right now, that was one of the arguments that they used back in the 1970s. But now we have a voluntary military.
That's right.
So women can volunteer if they want, as men volunteer. Women have become generals and admirals and have served with distinction in our military. And it's their choice to pursue that career. All of this changed in our lifetime, Cindy, that the universities, that for the Marines, for the Air Force, for the Navy, and for the Army, at first they didn't have any women. They now have opened their doors to women, and women have served with distinction in all capacities of the military. So that is one of the avenues and professions that women are pursuing.
Also with childcare, giving women childcare so they can go back to work during COVID, that was a big issue, with women being affected the most because they couldn't work because they were taking care of their children at home. And childcare obviously wasn't available during COVID, and women lost jobs and wasn't able to get back to work so much. So the childcare laws are so important, and having the ability to send your children somewhere so you can work. And how did you do it, Carolyn? You had two daughters, and I know you had you lost your husband when one of your daughters was in college at the time. You must believe in childcare and supporting women also to get leave when they have a child and having the time to be with the child, but also get back to work, but within a reasonable time, have time with their newborn. So what have you done in those areas to help women?
Well, it's always been a priority, work-family balance, because I faced it myself. One of the first bills that I voted on was unpaid family leave. I immediately put in legislation to expand it to all federal workers, which was under the jurisdiction of the Oversight Committee, and to expand it to all Americans. I was able to achieve that. I got paid family leave for federal employees. We were not able to get it for everyone. That bill has been reintroduced, and we are working on it. Women were also very much discriminated against in pregnancy.
Right.
And we passed the Anti-Pregnancy Discrimination Act, that you have to have reasonable accommodations so that they can work. A lot of times women are told by their doctors they can't bring up or have heavy materials, and they should have reasonable accommodation. So that bill has passed. So there's been a lot of bills and a whole number of bills in breastfeeding to allow breastfeeding on federal properties. And you now see it in the public places, whether you're going to the airport, they have places where you can breastfeed and take care of an infant, and all of that grew out of work that I did in Congress. And very importantly, women shouldn't be fired for having a job, and most women have to work because it takes two paychecks to support a family.
And there's many single mothers today that have chosen that.
Yeah, that's true too. So we need affordable and available childcare. We really don't have it. And it's a huge problem in America for working mothers to find appropriate childcare for their children.
You're the president right now of NOW, and I don't know how NOW has changed. Are you still the chapter president of the National Organization for Women?
Of the National Organization for Women. Our state convention is going to be right there in Washington, in Virginia. It's coming up this weekend, actually.
That's what I thought. So you'll be in Washington this weekend. What does NOW do for women? Because like I said, you are a trailblazer, you're an innovator, you break the rules when necessary to make new ones that are better. What does NOW do for women? How does it help women, and why did you get involved?
Well, the national organization is the largest women's organization in America. I call it the NRA of the women's movement. Mainly
great.
Because it is in every congressional district, it is in every city, it's in every state. So you have a network that is devoted to promoting and helping women. And if you look at it, there's been very little support for women. That's why we were fired when we had children, why we were fired when we were pregnant, why we were fired if we breastfed. So NOW was an organization that was dedicated to electing women candidates. And it does make a difference when you close that door and you're behind that door.
Yes.
I often see that people whose rhetoric is out in front of the community is very different behind the closed door, where you're making decisions on budgets and policies that affect family life. Women fight for other women. I know from my own experience, when I announced for Congress, and I announced on the day of the Casey decision that I was a member of the city council. I was the chairwoman of the contracts committee that oversaw a quarter of the city budget. It was $41 billion then. It's probably $71 billion now. And I had worked very hard and had all these wins really for women, children, and families. No one would endorse me. In the women's movement, they felt that I didn't have a chance of winning. They all went with Green, the incumbent, with the exception of NOW. It meant the world to me.
Wow.
That someone actually supported me.
NOW.
Yeah, wow, NOW.
Wow, NOW. For me, it's so interesting because we have women's presidents organizations like we used to have men's presidents organizations that my mother actually is on the board of.
It's changing. All of this has changed, Cindy, in our lifetime. When I first went to the city council, women were not in the police force or in the fire department. That was a change to open the doors of opportunity. And these are good paying, wonderful jobs to support families. And women were excluded from all of these jobs. And we opened those doors, and we opened doors to private clubs where they were excluded. So all of the areas trying to open the doors for women. It was very difficult. I remember when I first got elected, I was the only woman in the room. In so many meetings, or wherever I go, I would be the only woman usually there.
I got the opportunity during COVID to hear Lily Ledbetter speak, and that was like an extraordinary, story to finally have a woman speak up for herself and fight and really work tooth and nail to make a paycheck, and then wasn't treated equally, wasn't paid the same as a man and worked as hard, if not harder. So you need strong women to fight the battles. That's, part of it is really a woman that has the strong constitution and doesn't mind putting herself out there, which a lot of women don't. They don't want to put themselves out there, but you do. What are your daughters doing that you're proud of? Tell me a little bit about how you've been an influence on them and how they've been an influence on you.
My oldest daughter is a mother and a wife, and she's also an attorney. And she is an attorney with a migrant workers organization that has won many awards from government and the private sector for the work that she has done and they have done to help migrants in our country. And my other daughter is a product manager with Facebook. And
She's the one that does your social media for you.
I think she's busy in her own job. She
I'm
doesn't
sure.
have time for it.
Well, daughters need to help mothers, and mothers or get to help their mothers, and mothers get to help their daughters. And you're doing a great job getting them, hopefully, equal, like you said, means equal. So they are treated.
What's very disturbing, Cindy, is that my daughters have less rights than I did.
How is that?
Because they have rolled back access to abortion with the Dobbs decision. Of course, we live in a
well, we live in New York City, so we don't have the same rules everyone else.
It's an assault that this was able to take away from women. They say it's a state decision. They have a goal of having a federal standard denying women the choice to make this most personal of health decisions, reproductive health decisions. So I think it's a serious attack, and Justice Thomas has said that the privacy approved provisions of the 14th Amendment do not apply to women. And he then indicated that we would have to be looking at access to contraception, that is no longer protected, and that a gay marriage is not protected, which was also founded on the privacy provision. So I think if you don't push back, they're going to come like a wave trying to take rights that we've already won. And in fact, when I was in Congress, I spent a great deal of time just holding on to what we had, holding on to Roe v. Wade, or trying to, holding on to Title VI and Title VII and pregnancy discrimination laws, constantly working to roll back laws and efforts that we made to protect women. So with an Equal Rights Amendment, then these protections against discrimination would be part of the Constitution and part of the law of the land.
Well, we're going to be talking to hopefully the president of Planned Parenthood, also the granddaughter of one of the women that was a very strong proponent of reproductive rights. Liz Holtzman's going to be speaking to us, who, as you know, her personally.
That's wonderful. You're having all the great leaders.
We have great leaders who really realize how important. I mean, for me, in college at Planned Parenthood was extraordinarily important, and I always felt that it was a health resource, and also for people that couldn't otherwise afford it or wanted to keep it private if something in their lives unfortunately didn't work out as they planned or didn't plan for it. We need these options, and the laws are written for the men. Our laws are written by men and for men.
Well, the Equal Rights Amendment would merely just say that women should be treated equally, have the same opportunities.
Unfortunately, men don't get pregnant, so that's the problem.
And they're not discriminated against, right? But it's pretty frightening that they overturned 50 years of precedent with the Dobbs decision.
Well, I think they think state by state they should decide, but as you're saying, this is something that should be a choice.
No, they've publicly said that they would like a federal ban. They've publicly said that.
Yes,
it's on the record.
What is positive that we're looking forward to? I mean, whether it's AI or it's the metaverse or it's what are you excited about that's happening in the future that you might not be here to see in 20, 30, 40 years? But what are you looking forward to for your children or grandchildren?
Well, I'm continuing my interest in infrastructure, and I hope to see high-speed rail between New York and Boston. I think that would be great for our citizens. I would like to see women have equal rights and be in the Constitution. In fact, we are going to Seneca Falls with 100 students for the conference that we're having there on the 100th anniversary. So there's a whole list of activities.
When is that, Carolyn? When is that?
That is the third weekend in July. And in fact, I saw Vice President Kamala Harris last night and told her about the conference, and she may be interested in coming. We're going to get an invitation to her. And I think that you continue to work to save our planet. I'm very pleased with the movement to electrify the fleet, the federal fleet, and get off of really environmental disastrous fumes coming from the trucks and cars, and a cleaner environment. We still live in the greatest country on earth. There are more protections and respect for our individuals' freedoms than any other country. We are a democracy where our voices are heard. And I hope everyone will sign the petition and be part of helping to put women in the Constitution.
I've signed up.
Letter 4 ERA.org. That's what you need to do.
SIGN, sign the number 4 ERA.org. I've got it down. I see it in my sleep. You have a book there that you wrote. What motivated you to write that book? Tell me just a quick little bit about your book, even though it's from a while ago.
Called Rumors of our Progress Have Been Greatly Exaggerated. And it just pointed out efforts to roll back rights that we already have, whether it's Roe v. Wade, but also in healthcare and all other kinds of areas. And it shows discrimination against women and where it's happened in different ways and what we can do about it when we work collectively together to address it.
Well, women have to work collectively together, like you said, and be supportive. I know we have a friend in common, Patty Kenner, who I know always supports women in office. And I know
she's
you did
wonderful.
She's wonderful. And I know you helped with the Jewish Museum. You did something something very important, Patty shared with us. Tell our audience what you did for the Jewish people.
I authored and passed a bill called the Holocaust Education Bill.
Yes.
And with the rising anti-Semitism, I see a lot of answers through education, educating people.
Absolutely.
And I think you have to teach tolerance and understanding, and you have to really teach the Holocaust and show the disaster that it was and the pain and suffering that it caused. And I wrote the bill, and I couldn't get it through because the Board of Ed, they wanted to add every other outrage that had ever happened to the bill. And so you couldn't get it through. So I finally decided to take it to the museum, the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And they already have an excellent curriculum. Right. This will require a standardized curriculum to be taught. Mm-hmm. The teachers can go to a centralized place and get lesson plans on the Holocaust, on understanding that is age appropriate. Roughly 13 states have passed Holocaust education programs requirements. New York State is one of them. And I've reviewed their curriculum. I think it's excellent. It's part of the collection that is at the Holocaust Museum. But Patty I had a hard time passing this bill. And Patty would show up at every press conference. I don't know where she found them, but she'd find all these survivors who would tell their stories and really tell the need of it. And really the stories of Holocaust deniers and others. And what does George Santana says, that those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Exactly.
So to really raise awareness and create more understanding and support for each other.
Well, we just had Elizabeth Bellack, who was a hidden child of the Holocaust, on our podcast.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she was honored at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, which, of course, Patty Kenner is on the board, and she welcomed us all at that luncheon. And the 92-year-old spoke like she was a teenager. She was so full of life. She was an incredible woman. Well, thank you so much. We so enjoyed this wonderful conversation, and we're so looking forward to getting having the 28th Amendment be the ERA amendment. And I think in 2024 it's going to happen. In 2024.
Well, we're trying hard, and the petition drive is a big part of it.
Yes.
Because ultimately they will sue. It'll go to the Supreme Court. And we have to show that not only a poll, but the fact that Americans have signed this petition and support the equality of opportunity and freedom for all people, including half the population that's female. Thank you for shining the light on it.
We've had to fight hard, and we're going to keep fighting.
All your viewers to sign the petition and support the Equal Rights Amendment.
we're going to have it there on the podcast. And when we put it on YouTube, we'll have it on YouTube. So we'll get it out there. We promise. And thank you so much for your time today. You're always such a bright light. And again, trailblazer, innovator, rule breaker. Please subscribe to Inside the She Cave, Trailblazers, Innovators, Rule Breakers, wherever you listen to podcasts, including but not limited to Spotify, Amazon, and Apple Podcasts. If you prefer to watch, you can visit us on YouTube.